All right, welcome back to the best damn training channel on YouTube. Today is day one of a brand new program. So we just finished up the unit combine program. I'm gonna be launching that program this Friday on Train Heroics, so you guys will be able to get that if you'd like. But today is day one of Strictly Strength. Now, Strictly Strength is a 12-week strength cycle that I've been planning on doing for quite a while, but I'm going to be doing a modified version of this because I still want to get to the track and do my sprints and do some jumping. But when I release the program, it's just going to be the weight room work. There's going to be no track work, and there's going to be no extra days outside of the 4 weight room days once the program is released. But today, as you can see, I've already done a little bit. So I did a standing triple jump, which that's kind of taking place of like the multiple broad jumps that I've been doing. And then I moved on to kind of a new power complex. I don't really call this an acceleration complex. It's more of like a power development complex. I'm just using acceleration patterns in order to develop power. So the same concept with the acceleration complex where we did like a heavy 7-step sled into a lighter 10, 15, 20 meter sled and then into an acceleration. That's more focused on like the specifics of acceleration. So the heavy 7 steps is to develop that first phase in the acceleration, try to gain as much horizontal projection and power through that first 10 meters. Then the lighter sled kind of develops that middle phase of transition when you're going through your late acceleration, so like 10 to 15 to 20, 25 meters. And then we do an acceleration with nothing, kind of get that contrast in. The idea of what I'm doing today is similar, where I'm doing a heavy acceleration bound. So I'm bounding through 20 meters using sled as resistance. Then I'm going into an acceleration bound. So we're doing the same thing minus the external load, and we're just trying to get as powerful as we can on those bounds. And then I'm throwing in a sprint at the end just to maintain that acceleration stimulus. I don't want to completely remove it and just be doing a bunch of plyos on today. So we're throwing that sprint in there every few reps in order to keep that that stimulus in there. And then later on this week, when we do our second track day, that's going to be more of like a traditional sprinting type day. So I'm going to do 2 to 3 total sets of that complex, 2 acceleration bounds with the sled, 2 acceleration bounds without the sled, and then 1 20-meter acceleration before we go into the rest of today's plyo work after we finish the track stuff. So like I said, this is more of a power complex that I'm focusing on, using this to kind of keep the legs having a similar stimulus to doing a bunch of sprints, but I'm kind of taking out the amount of sprint volume that I'm doing and focusing a lot more on the strength side of things, because this program is called Strictly Strength. So I want to really put a good amount of effort into the strength stuff and see how much progress we can get when we go into the strength work on everything. So the acceleration bound is just like an alternating bound, except for the change is you're going to keep that forward torso angle. So rather than just doing like alternating bounds and jumping left to right, I'm going to maintain that forward trunk angle and drive that leg up and bound with each of these steps, and not necessarily try to sprint while I got this sled on. So the sled actually makes it a little bit easier because you have that pull at the hips that'll allow you to maintain that forward lean that we want. And then you're trying to be really disciplined when you get into the acceleration bound without the sled to try to maintain that and forcefully put force into the ground, push back down behind you so you can maintain that forward torso angle. All right, second rep with the sled. Like I said, with the sled is easy because you have that connection that's kind of holding you back and you're trying to forcefully push against that. So it allows you to maintain that angle a lot easier. Without the sled, doing an acceleration bound, the longer you try to hold that acceleration bound, the more difficult it becomes, because eventually you're going to hit kind of like your peak velocity that you can do in an acceleration bound, and you're going to want to get this feeling of standing up and starting to run because you feel like you're going to fall forward. So be very disciplined on maintaining that proper angle and really holding this position where you're up in this acceleration phase. So you got your knee up and you're about to drive that foot down and push, and really push as hard as you can. You're trying to gain as much ground on each of these steps. Over exaggerate the length of those bounds as you're going through this. So this is gonna be my first rep without the sled. I'm gonna do 2 reps of acceleration bounds with no sled here before we do a 20-meter sprint. All right, and then at the end of every set, you're gonna finish off with a 20-meter sprint. I'm keeping these at like 95% effort. I'm not trying to go all out on these. So high amount of effort on that, not a full-on sprint, trying to go as hard as you can because you've already done 4 repetitions of 20 meters here. So we're just trying to maintain a little bit of a sprint stimulus and not totally remove that sprint from an entire day because I still want to sprint twice a week. 20 meters here, hard 95% effort. All right, so next thing we're doing today is a seated box jump. So something that's gonna be kind of a vertical orientation jump. You could sub this out for anything as long as you're taking off at a vertical manner because we've already done a lot of horizontal work. So now I wanna put in a little bit more vertical work. So from a seated position, jumping up onto a box, gonna be doing sets of 3 on this until I feel like really the legs are starting to get a little bit too fatigued. I want each of these reps to be fast, want to feel that pop off the ground, feel like I'm kind of floating through the air, put a lot of force into the ground as I do this. And then I'm going to be going somewhere close to about 90-degree angle on the seated position. So I have a little box there, put it on a little bit of foam mats to put me close to that 90-degree angle. And that's where I'm going to be pushing off from. So all right, so last thing I'm gonna do today is a single leg depth drop. And all a depth drop is just means you're dropping from an altitude and you're trying to stick the landing as you get into the ground. So single leg, we're just gonna be focusing on landing on 1 foot at a time. When I'm doing my depth drops, what I like to do is I like to try to stick the landing and hold that there. It's been shown if you do this on force plates, if you try to land softly, that you're actually reducing the amount of ground reaction that you're getting, the forces that your leg is going to be experiencing versus trying to land stiffly. So when I do my single leg drop, or if I do a double leg drop, what I'm trying to do is land and stick the landing. So this is something I like to introduce prior to doing variations of depth jumps. So I'll start off with a cycle of doing some depth drops, and then we'll go into some low depth jumps, and then we'll start building up on the depth jumps. So the depth jumps is something that I am going to be adding in later on in the cycle. So I like to add this in, get a little bit of shock method in there, get the connective tissues, get the nervous system used to feeling that ground reaction force, and then we'll start trying to react against it and pop off the ground later on doing some depth jumps. But the variation of single leg depth drop that I'm doing is I'm trying to land in a little bit deeper of a knee angle. So a normal depth drop, you're looking at just dropping from altitude and catching yourself. So if I was gonna do a single leg variation, it would just be here and then multiple reps of the same thing. But to kind of stick with the theme of like the seated box jumps that I did today were from a 90-degree angle. A lot of the acceleration work, I'm starting my initiate propulsion or initiate that kind of projection angle from close to a 90-degree-ish angle. So as I do my single leg depth drops today, I'm gonna be keeping this back foot on the box to just try to maintain a little bit of balance, but I'm gonna be trying to land in that 90-degree angle, and then I'll do 4 reps on one side and then 4 reps onto the other. Try and land and stick that landing. You don't wanna be soft on this landing. And then obviously being in a deeper knee angle, you're gonna feel this a little bit more on the quad and the knee than specifically just the lower leg. And before I get a question about this, I am not barefoot for any specific reason other than the fact that the track is already soft and I don't need to wear shoes to make this be softer. All right, right, so that is the session for the day. I'm gonna do a few more sets of that, obviously. I'm just showing you guys the focus of what the depth drops is gonna be. But that's kind of the focus on Mondays. Very general, just kind of power output type day, because tomorrow we're gonna go into the gym. I've got some strength work to do. We're gonna start off by doing some snatches, which we haven't done in a very long time, so that's gonna be interesting. But then we've got back squats, we've got hinging, we've got some accessory work to do. We're gonna really focus on building a solid foundation for the first 4 weeks of this 12-week program. This is kind of borderline like volume hypertrophy type stuff when we're getting to the weight room. So we're going to be doing sets of like 8s on back squats, 10s on back squats, stuff like that, which I don't know if I'm very much looking forward to something like that, but I programmed it, so I'm going to do it. But other than that, I appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.